Christians. Our sister Evie is giving us her testimony tonight, and I have been waiting, for these couple of weeks to hear it, and I'm sure we're going to be blessed by it. And the other thing about Evie, in terms of being able to give her testimony, she has a great voice that we have all benefited from hearing. So, but I'll say that and I'll leave the rest of that and not linger on too much and let Evie get into her testimony. Our sister Evie, saved by grace. Give us your testimony, sister.
Amen. Thank you so much for even your willingness to have me on to share my life and for what the Lord has done in my life. So I have like a little thing that I kind of wrote down just so that I can stay kind of like in order. My life once I read the book of the life of Paul, it just reminded me a lot of where the Lord had drew me out from. So I'm going to start with my childhood. My childhood I'm the baby of 8. And so my mom was from Puerto Rico, came down with only a 9th grade education and worked in a factory. And there was a time that she had 2 jobs because she just always liked to have for us. We never really struggled because mom did what she had to do to make sure that her kids had what they needed. And she always picked really horrible men. So growing up, I didn't have a really good role model. My dad and mom broke up pretty young in age. I was like 3. She was married prior. She had a husband, had 4 children. That didn't end well. There was some infidelity that happened. My mom actually ran away with her children, went to Puerto Rico in hiding from her husband at the time. And he ended up finding her, kidnapped his children from the backyard, and took his children back to Chicago where my mom lived with him. So my mom fought really hard to get her children back. She got her children back. She moved to Puerto Rico, met my dad. My dad was a drunk, and he was about 12 years younger than mine. And she already had 4 kids, and he had none. So of course, my grandparents weren't too happy about that. My dad is Hawaiian and Hispanic. So we have Hawaiian in our blood. So we're Hawaiian and Hispanic. And they wasn't too happy because my dad was talking to a woman that had 4 children and was married, and he didn't have any children, even though he wasn't doing the best in his life. So anyway, met my mom, came back and had 4 children with her. So with the 4, then the 4 that he had with my mom, but I'm the baby. And during this time, it was, like I said, my dad was an alcoholic. My mom really never did drugs or anything like that, but my dad did. And my mom was a very hardworking person, so she had to fight for her respect all the time. And so my siblings are way older than me. So I have siblings that were like in really serious situations. Right. My siblings were in gangs and things like that. My family we didn't know about Jesus. My mom didn't raise us knowing the gospel at all because my mom didn't know the gospel. So we just lived a crazy life. So growing up for me, smoking, drinking, partying, that was cool because everybody did it, Yeah, so we didn't talk about, like education and things like that. That wasn't a thing for us. It was just like get by, So so that's kind of how I grew up. So I was still in alcohol when the parties were going on downstairs at like the age of 12, just still in nicotine. Then I started getting into stealing pills from my mom. I was really young. I learned to, sometimes some of the things that I talk about or some of the things that have to do with my testimony are really difficult for me because it's not something that I like to boast about because it's just difficult. But I learned to shoot my first gun at 13. And I thought my brother was the coolest. My brother was serious gangster in our town. He was respected. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. So I grew up with wanting street respect, and I got it. So that was all in my childhood, all within like the age of 13 years old. So when I got into my later ages, like, I'm talking about like 15, 16, 17 years old, I was never really into the guys, into boys. I was more into the streets and learning how to get money in different ways that were completely illegal. So I started to do things because, I'm a female, so I can use my looks, to do things. And I did. I transported for a while and got that kind of income. And I just ran my life like that at a young age. I went up to like 17 years old, 18 years old when I started that. Then around that time, I got a hold of a group that they just weren't doing good things. They were actually, you would call them stick-up kids. And so, but they were stick-up kids for really big things. They were known to be stick-up kids for the big guys. And so, because I was a female and I already had my own income and things like that at a young age, like I said, education just wasn't a thing. I dropped out of school really young. I got kicked out of school, actually, pretty young. And when I got kicked out of school, I went to live with my dad because none of the schools in my area would accept me because of my track record. So my mom was like, either you go to Job Corps or you go to live with your dad in Puerto Rico. So I chose to live with my dad in Puerto Rico. And during the time that I was out there, before I went out there, my brother that I said that was in really big gangs, this guy that I was kind of liked me. I really wasn't into having boyfriends and things like that. But this guy that kind of liked me, one of the first guys I dated, was a very violent young guy. He ended up harming my brother's best friend in a tussle of some sort. And so my brother went to take care of business, to drive by to take care of business, and saw me talking to the guy and never did what he had to do. He actually called me and said, what are you doing in X block, on this block? And I'm like, oh, I'm just saying goodbye because mommy's sending me out. I got to leave tomorrow. And he was like, you need to go because you're like really dealing with some bad people. So I go to Puerto Rico, and when I was out there, a lot of weird things were happening. I knew nothing about spirituality. I knew nothing about Christianity. I knew nothing about religion. But when I went out there, that's when things started to kind of click for me, because my grandma was very religious. She spoke a lot about God. She talked a lot about God. My mom would say things like, you better be good because God is watching you. But she didn't tell me anything else about anything because she didn't know anything, So she just said, you better watch it because there's a God and he's watching you. So I'm like, what God? Who? I don't understand, So I have a sister also. Before I went to Puerto Rico, before I got kicked out of the schools, I have a sister that's 7 years older than me. So my mom kept saying, like, you gotta do well like Lynette. You gotta do everything. Just remember that name, this Lynette sister of mine that's 7 years older than me. She kept saying, you gotta look at Lynette. Lynette, you gotta follow Lynette's footsteps. Lynette's graduating, Lynette started going to church, and we shared a room. But my sister, I didn't really get along with her because she was a good girl and I wasn't. I didn't want to be a good girl. I liked what I was doing, I used to actually steal her identification so that I could get in areas that I probably shouldn't get in. It was terrible. So I wasn't fond of Lynette because I thought Lynette was stuck up and, she was just goody two shoes and I didn't want to be her, So I remember going into Lynette's room though, and I might have been like 17 years old, and she was on her knees and she was praying, but she was praying in a language that I didn't understand. And I'm Hispanic. I know 2 languages. So I'm like, what the heck is she talking about? So I thought it was crazy. So I went downstairs and I said to my mom, and this is right before I left to Puerto Rico, I said to my mom, I don't want to sleep with her in that room with her. And my mom's like, well, why? I'm like, Lynette's up there talking another language that I never heard about. I never understood what she was saying. I don't know what that is. And I'm afraid of it. I don't know what it is. So my mom said, she knows God. And I said, well, whatever God she knows, she's talking in a language that's scary. So I never thought nothing of it. Me and Lynette didn't click anyway. So whatever she was doing, I just didn't want to be a part of. So I go back and, get kicked out of school, go with my dad, and now I'm over here. And my grandma knows the Lord, and she would pray for me every night. She would always say, oh, come on, give me a kiss, give me a hug. And she would always, every time she hugged me, she would just say in Spanish, oh, Father God, just thank you for my baby, and I'm just like, okay, like I didn't understand it. And then I ended up getting a best friend out there. And this best friend, something about this best friend, my dad was saying, stay away from her house. Because her house and what her mom does is not of God. So I'm like, okay, this is not of God. Like, it's not clicking for me. So then I start seeing my best friend's mom and her family doing these like dances dressed in white. And they're doing these like dances with music and, drinking and like people just convulsing and speaking in languages that I didn't know anything about. But mind you, my dad said, stay away from that. So he said, I don't even want you walking on her sidewalk. So I'm like, I respect my dad. My dad had beat my butt. So I was like, let me just listen to my dad. So I stayed away from there. I was still best friends with her, but I stayed away. So I ended up, we were riding a lot of horses back in PR, and I was riding a horse and I got bucked off the horse and I braced my fall. I don't know if anybody could see. I went to brace my fall and I broke my arm and it was in a lot of pain. So I was like, take me to my dad right away. And my friend's like, well, let me take you to my mom. And I'm like, your mom? My dad said to stay away from your mom. He was like, you don't have to go inside. Just let me take you to my mom. So she takes me to her mom, and her mom kind of just grabs my arm and she goes like this to my arm. And then she says, her arm is broken. You got to take her to the nearest emergency room. Take her to her dad take her to the nearest emergency room. So they do that. I ended up having to come emergency back to my town because they would not do surgery, because back in the day, Puerto Rico was not a part of the United States. This is many years ago. So they were like, my mom sent for me right away. I did emergency surgery, never went back to Puerto Rico. I didn't see my dad ever since then. So I come back down here, and mind you, my mindset is just like, I remember what was going on over there. I remember, there was a lot of like spirituality, speaking in another language. It kind of sounded like what was going on in my room with my sister. I was like, yeah, I want nothing to do with any of it. Not this one, not that one, nothing. I don't want anything to do with any of it. So I ignored it. I ended up losing a brother, and that's what made me think about the afterlife. I never cared about the afterlife. I didn't want to know about spirituality. I could care less about what was above. I could care less what was underneath. I didn't want anything to do with it. And so my brother passed, and then my other brother passed like a couple years later, and I'm like, this is crazy. Like, what do I think about the afterlife? Like, is there an afterlife? Like, what happens after this? Do I believe that there is an afterlife? Like, what do I think? So it made me think. It just made me think. It made me very sad. I lost one at 42, one at 36. I was concerned with, what if that happens to me? Because I lived my life so crazy. My life was crazy. I came back and I got with a group of guys that were called stick-up kids. And these stick-up kids did stick-ups all over our area. Everybody knew them. And I got involved with these guys because I'm a female. And they were like, oh, Evie, we can get you a lot of money. We can get you, you got the looks. You know what I mean? You could just, they'll take you out. They'll do whatever they want. You know what I mean? And I respected myself. So it wasn't like I was going over here to do some things with these guys that would violate myself. I was just violating myself in another way, putting myself in danger, So I was doing that for a little bit. I started doing that in DC for a little bit. And I got a gun. I got a weapon put to my head because the person that was about to be dealt with, he sensed something. He sensed something, that I was a part of something. And so he put it to my head, and the clip fell out. And when the clip fell out, if you know anything about guns, you have to pull the release button in order for the clip to fall out. So I don't know how that happened, but it fell out. So I kicked it. And when I kicked it, the people that I was with grabbed it. So now this person that was thinking I was against him had nothing, he had no weapon. So I had to cover myself up, and I had to say, oh, them guys were trying to get us. Like, I'm sticking with you. Let's stick together. Let's get out of here. So this guy puts me in his car. Mind you, he's a producer of a music producer in DC. And he's like, you was with them. And I was like, no, I wasn't with them. If I was with them, I wouldn't be with you right now. I'm with you, So I had to try to convince this dude. He stayed with me for 2 hours. And it was crazy. Like, his brain was going crazy because all he kept thinking was, I got to get rid of this person. She's a part of what was just happening. You know what I mean? But I was able to, by the way that I was talking, I don't know, it was just a grace of God. I didn't know God, but he's like, this is not your time. It wasn't going to happen then. So this person ended up releasing me. I went a little crazy. I ain't even going to lie. I moved back to PA. I was like, I need to chill. I need to stop doing these things and putting myself and involving myself in things that I shouldn't be doing. And I stayed with my big sister, but I was losing my mind a little bit because there's a lot of trauma that has to do with those kinds of things, you know. You put yourself in harm's way like that, you know, and you think you're tough, but when you're by yourself, you can, you know, really kind of go crazy a little bit. So I started losing my mind a little bit with all of that, you know, and my sister started getting real concerned with me because I was real paranoid. I was paranoid. And then I ended up not changing. So I didn't change. I actually got involved with some other people, and then I started pushing other things that I shouldn't have been pushing, making money again, doing transports. And I got pregnant. And I was like, okay, what do I do with this, you know? And so I contemplated not giving birth, if you know what I mean. And I called that sister that I didn't like. I called her up. Remember, she knew Jesus. She's the only person that knew him. I happened to call her up. And I called her and I told her to pick me up. And she picks me up and I said, hey, I know I ain't talked to you in a while. And she wanted to know all about my life. And I was like, no, I don't want to tell you anything about my life. I want to tell you that I have got this going on and I can't do this. At this point, Meg, I was like 21. I was young. I was 21. So all that was before 21, guys. I was a hot mess. So 21 years old, I got pregnant, and I called my sister that I couldn't stand, and she was like, so what do you mean? You mean that you're like, you want to like not have this kid? And I'm like, yeah, like you got to take it or something. Something has to happen here, you know? I can't raise a kid. And mind you, me and my daughter's dad, I met him through business. You know what I mean? And I wasn't into like, you know, being with a bunch of men. But there was something about him that I ended up digging. And, you know, we wasn't even a thing. So, but I knew that I got pregnant to this particular person because I wasn't, you know, promiscuous like that. You know what I mean? And I just didn't want to have a baby to this person at all. It was just not a good person. So my sister convinced me to keep it. And I moved back to my mom's house because I was on my own already. I was in the street. I was just acting up. I actually had oh, Lord have mercy. I lived in a penthouse at the time. And there was like, we were roommates, but we were pushers. We were the people that you would come to for the big things. You know what I mean? It was not good. So I dealt with a lot of that. I was touching a lot of it. It was in my house. I was, you know, and at the time, ecstasy was a thing. So I was doing a lot of partying and popping things and, you know, consuming. So, yeah. And it was just a mess. And just rewind a little bit. When all that partying was happening when I was little, when I was 12, and I started stealing stuff, stealing cigarettes and stealing all that kind of stuff, my mom was 47 years old, and I was around 7 years old, when my mom met her man that she was going to stay with until I was 21, and he was 19. So my mom was a cougar. Yeah. So my mom stayed with this man from 7 years old until I was 21, until I had a baby. When I was pregnant with Anaya. When I went back home, mind you, my grandma was dying. My stepdad had cheated on my mom. And my mom, like, she was like burning his clothes when I got there. It was a mess. He was like driving like Biggie Smalls in the street going reverse. And my mom's like throwing a brick through his car at the age of like 60. Like, what are we doing? You know, it was just, my life was just a mess. And I didn't have great examples. That's what my examples were, you know? So I ended up having Zanaya, and I moved out of this penthouse. I mean, it was a beautiful house. It was 4 of us that lived there. We lived this big old penthouse. And I moved back home, and I didn't know Jesus, so I didn't say, oh, I'm going to convert my life to the Lord. I didn't say any of that. I just said, I need to change my life because I don't want this child to live in this type of life. So I went back to school. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take advantage of my mom's time, and her allowing me back home. So I went back to school. I got my GED. I went to nursing school and I went hard. I was a nurse. I had 4 jobs, I had 4 jobs at one point. So I hardly ever saw my kid because I worked all the time, but I had to keep myself busy. And I was with her dad for a little bit. I tried that, it wasn't good at all, but I tried it. But I always took my daughter to my sister's house. And I would always say to her, you know that Jesus that you be talking about? You make sure you tell her about him. God and all that stuff. You teach her. I don't know, but you teach her about that. I don't, you don't got to tell me. Just tell her. So me and my sister kind of got a little bit closer because I was changing my ways. She didn't like me at all. Because we just had 2 totally different lives. And she didn't like the fact that I would put my daughter in danger because this is the lifestyle that I lived, So anyway, when I broke up with Zanaya's dad, I got back into the game. Nobody knew. I thought it was slick. Nobody knew. I had my nursing license, but then I got with a Connect, and I connected with the Connect, if you know what I mean. And I was doing things like that, but I still worked because I enjoyed to have the good things. And I felt like working, I wasn't getting those good things by working because I was living check for check. I never lived check for check in my life. You know what I mean? I didn't have to worry about that. So I was like, I can't, this is not fun to me. So I started pushing things that were going to just give me more money so that I could do vacations and things like that with my daughter. And that's what we did. But then I met Nick, my husband now, and my daughter was 3 years old. And Nick was like a breath of fresh air to me. I was used to bikers. You had to be hardcore. You had to have tattoos. You had to just be bad. I didn't like you if you wasn't bad, and he was not bad at all. There was nothing about Nick that was bad. He was just the sweetest person ever. And I couldn't believe that he liked me. I was just like, okay, I still carry things for safety for me and my children. I have one in my car, I got one in my purse. That I didn't live loud. When I say loud, I was loud when I was younger. I didn't live loud, but I lived this way because it's what I knew, And I met him and I dated him. And so me and him, yeah, Nick was awesome. Me and him, we would do little dates. I didn't have a lot of friends because I didn't let anybody in my circle because people that do things like that don't allow big circles. You understand? Your circles are small because you don't know who's going to tell. You don't know who's going to have envy. You only have certain friends. So I wasn't about friends because friends, my mom would say, friends are like $1 in a pocket, So I didn't mess around. So Nick comes over to my house a couple times and I stopped talking to him for like 3 weeks because he walked in my house and didn't say hi to my daughter. And I didn't play that. I was like, yeah, you don't come up in my house and not speak to my child. So I stopped talking to him for 3 weeks and he chased me down like a dog. And I was just like, why is this guy? Like, leave me alone. Like, you don't talk to my child. I won't even look at you again. But there was something about him that he kept coming to me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to let this guy in. He didn't have any children, so he didn't know how to respond to kids, So anyway, I let him benefit of the doubt, thought about that, let him in. And so one day, I don't have my child, and he's like, we're watching a movie, and I get a phone call. Mind you, I do quick things like I drop out real quick to go do something, and then I come back. And I did that twice, and I never really did that around him. So he said to me, the heck was that about? And I was like, I really didn't want to say anything to him because I knew that he didn't know about me. But other people were telling him, oh, you don't know that girl? You don't know her? And he wasn't from my area. So they kept saying, oh, you don't know her. Even his own cousin that knows me said, oh, you don't want to talk to her. You don't know what she's about, And he was like, no, yeah, I like her, So he asked me, and I said, listen, I'm not going to lie to you. You don't need to know my business. You know what I mean? You really don't know me like that. I cut you off for a reason. You can't be coming over here asking a bunch of questions. You know what I mean? Because that's my business, And so he just said, I just want to know, I heard some things about you. I wasn't sure how true those things were. And so I was just honest with him. I said, listen, this is what I do. Yeah, I don't know if you are with that, or, I don't know how you roll, but this is what I do. And he was just like, you know what? Listen, that's not going to pull me away from you. I've never dealt with anybody that's ever did anything like that. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. I want you to know that you don't have to do those things. If you ever needed me financially, I can assist you. And I'm like, but that's the whole purpose. I don't need nobody, And he was like, no, but I'm different. I would want to do and take care of you, or like, I've never had anybody say that to me before. So I kind of was like, I felt dumb. I was like, this is real dumb. Like, what am I doing? Like, So anyway, I said I wanted to stop doing it because I just wanted to stop doing it. I didn't have a real purpose. I just felt like this gentleman might be somebody that God, that I really didn't talk about or know about, put in my life, So, and he talked about God a lot. And so he was raised in the church. So I don't know anything about the church. So he asked me to go to the church a couple of times, and I went to the church a couple of times, and it just wasn't something that I wanted to do. They were very charismatic. Now I know the difference. They were very charismatic and things like that. And mind you, I had that sister, Lynette. She was going to church as well. So he said, well, if you don't want to go to my church, why don't we just try your sister's church? Same thing. I would go over there, very charismatic. There was people like, all kinds of stuff was going on. There was one time, there was this lady that was drunk in the spirit. What the heck is that? So I said to somebody, well, what is that? And she says, oh, that's such and such. She's drunk in the spirit. She's a blessing. I said, well, I don't know about all that. That was the last time I went there. So there was something about this charismatic movement that looked too familiar to me, and it looked like what was happening in Puerto Rico. They looked identical. I'm just being real. They were speaking in languages I didn't know anything about, never heard before, and they looked too similar. There was a hierarchy, which is the pastor up there talking, and there was a hierarchy that was doing these dance sessions and all this stuff that was going on, and I wanted nothing to do with it, So I told Nick, I said, listen, stop inviting me to church. Church is not a thing for me. I just, I'm not about it. I don't know anything about it. I don't want anything to do with it. So Nick and I get married, and I stopped doing the things that I was doing. Like, I sort of stopped. I told people that I stopped. But I always had something in my pocket. I always had something in my pocket that people just couldn't take from me. So this time, this is a hot mess. I started judging shows, like exotic shows. And I was doing extra money like that. Because to me, I said, oh, this don't have to do with any, I don't go to jail for this. I don't have to go to jail for this. And wait, I got to fast forward real quick. When I was about 18 years old, when I was doing all those things, that I was going out of town and I was doing all these things, I went to jail. But I went to jail for something I did not do. I went in, and it was for robbery, right? But remind you, I was doing them. So when I was in that cell, I remember saying, but I'm in here for something I did not do. Like all those other ones that I done did, I never got caught for them. So how, this doesn't make any sense. And the girl that was caught with me said, that's because God is saying to you, this is what's going to happen to you if you don't get your life together. And I remember her saying that, and I didn't say anything to her because I didn't know anything about that. Okay, back to Nick. So then I married Nick, and I stopped doing things that people thought that I did, and I started going to Philadelphia with my sister, and we started making money off of shows. She's like, I gotta, she knew she could call me. I got a gig for you. Let's do this. Let's go. So we go, and this is me and my bigger sister. She's like 60 right now. So she's a couple years older than me. I'm 45. And she just knew her little sister was wild. Just, there was all kinds of things that happened in between there that I got a lot of trouble with the police. I started catching a record, all of that. I had to get my things expunged as I got older. But when I was dealing with Nick and I started doing this, Nick said, I'm not interested in that, Evie. I said, listen, all I need you to do is work the door. That's all I need you to do. I'm selling the tickets. I'm doing everything. You just got to do the security